You're not even my real mother. Don't make this harder than it already is." The words struck like a slap, sharp and merciless. I stood in their driveway, suitcase by my feet, as thunderclouds gathered above. My son, no, the boy I had raised as my own, wouldn't look me in the eye. Behind him, his wife stood smug in the doorway of their upscale home, arms crossed, satisfied. I wasn't just being sent away. I was being erased. My name is Ellen Whitaker. I'm 62 years old, and I raised a son who now says I'm not really his mother. His name is Adam. I took him in when he was 7 years old, after a car crash took the lives of his parents, my dearest friends. I was a single woman running a family farm in the heart of Nebraska. No children of my own, but plenty of love to give. Adam needed someone, and I thought no. I believed I was that someone. For 11 years, I cared for him like he was my flesh and blood. I helped him through nightmares, through middle school heartbreaks, through SAT prep and college decisions. I taught him how to fix a fence, how to catch a fish, and how to treat people right. Or so I thought. When he got accepted into an elite university in Chicago, I sold my land that had been in the Whitaker family for 4 generations to pay his tuition. I gave up my legacy so he could build his. Now, all these years later, I found myself standing outside his mansion in Denver, told to leave before his wife's business dinner guests arrived. The stories I told about the farm, my calloused hands, even my accent, Vanessa said they didn't fit the image. Adam didn't argue. He just checked his watch and said, "Things change. Ellen, people change." He didn't offer a hug, just handed me an envelope and pointed to the waiting Uber. Inside was $5,000 and a glossy brochure for Golden Valley Retirement Home, a retirement home. As if I was some old fixture to be stored out of sight. I should have been angry. I should have shouted. But instead, I stood there silent as the rain began to fall, soaking through my jacket and clinging to my skin. I watched the boy I raised walk back to his front door, never once looking back. That's when something hardened inside me, not bitterness, not yet, but clarity. They may have pushed me out, but I wasn't done. What Adam didn't know, what I had nearly forgotten myself, was that I'd kept one piece of my past buried deep in that old suitcase, and it had the power to change everything. I sat in the back of that Uber, the envelope still clutched in my lap, my heart heavier than the suitcase in the trunk. I couldn't bring myself to look back at the house, that house, paid for, in part, by the land I sacrificed, by the farm my daddy worked with his hands, and my mama prayed over every morning. Golden Valley Retirement Home was just 10 minutes away, but it felt like a journey through everything I'd lost. When we arrived, the driver gave me a soft smile as he lifted my suitcase out of the trunk. "Take care, ma'am," he said, as if he somehow knew the goodbye I hadn't been given. Inside, the receptionist greeted me with cheerful efficiency. "Mrs. Whitaker." "Right. It's Miss," I corrected gently, forcing a smile. "I never married." She paused, then nodded. "Your son made arrangements. Your room is ready." I hated the way she said "your son," as if I were some burden passed along like luggage. My room was small but tidy. One bed, one dresser, a narrow window overlooking a parking lot speckled with bird droppings and oil stains. I placed the envelope on the nightstand and sat down, listening to the quiet hum of fluorescent lights. I didn't cry, not yet. I was too numb for that. Instead, I started unpacking. My hands moved slowly through the few clothes I owned, folding them into drawers, pretending it was just a short visit, a stop along the road. But when I unzipped the inner pocket of my suitcase and reached in, my fingers brushed against something I hadn't planned to find. A folded contract, the original paperwork from when I sold the farm to Ridgefield Properties. I pulled it out, almost not recognizing it for a second. Yellowing at the edges, slightly creased. I had kept it all these years, stuffed away and forgotten. I don't even know why. Maybe as a memory, maybe as proof I once had something of value. I unfolded the pages and read slowly, letting the legal jargon sink in. Then I saw it, tucked into the very last page, a clause I'd forgotten about. If, within 10 years of the date of sale, the purchaser has not completed the proposed development plan as outlined specifically for sustainable community housing, the ownership rights shall revert to the seller, minus the payment already rendered. My heart thudded in my chest. Could it be that land, my land, was meant to be used for good, for working families, for homes with porches and gardens and kids on bicycles? But just last year, I'd overheard Adam and Vanessa talking over drinks on their back patio. I was folding laundry in the guest house, the window open. They're sitting on a gold mine, Vanessa had said. They're finally going to turn the property into luxury condos. Once the clause expires, we'll be set. But the clause hadn't expired. Not yet. They were banking on me forgetting, on me being too tired, too small, too old to fight. But I wasn't. I was hurt. I was grieving. But I wasn't powerless. I picked up the landline in the room and dialed a number I hadn't used in over a decade. It rang 3 times. "Hello, Diane." My voice cracked. "Speaking. It's Ellen Whitaker." A pause, then warmth. "Ellen, it's been forever. Are you all right?" "No," I said, truth rolling off my tongue for the first time in days. "I'm not. I need help. Legal help." She didn't hesitate. "I'm listening." Over the next 20 minutes, I told her everything. Selling the farm, the clause, Adam, the mansion, the envelope with $5,000, the retirement home, the silence. When I finished, I sat with the receiver pressed to my ear, trembling. Finally, Diane spoke. "Ellen, you might have a case. That clause you found, that's called a reversionary interest. It's rare, but when it's in writing, it's enforceable. But the land's been sold again," I whispered, "to another company." "Doesn't matter," she replied. "If the clause was in the original deed and the developers failed to act on the plan within the specified time, the land could revert to you. But there's more if they sold that land without disclosing the clause. We're talking about a potentially fraudulent transfer." My stomach turned. "Do you think Adam knew? I think you know the answer." I closed my eyes. She was right. Adam had gone quiet when I'd asked about the farm a few months back. Said something vague about it changing hands. I remember thinking how odd that sounded. Now I knew why. He hadn't just forgotten what I did for him. He'd hoped I wouldn't remember what I gave. "Ellen," Diane continued, "I need to see that contract. Can you scan it to me?" I looked around the room. No computer, no printer, just that suitcase and the contract in my lap. "I can't. But can you come here?" There was no hesitation. "Pack a bag," she said. "I'll pick you up in the morning." My guest room's still open, just like yours was all those years ago. I set the receiver down gently, and for the first time in what felt like weeks, I let myself cry. Not because I'd been cast aside, but because I finally realized I wasn't finished. By the time Diane pulled into the parking lot at Golden Valley the next morning, I was already waiting on the curb, suitcase at my side. I watched her step out of her car with that same determined grace I remembered from years ago. She hadn't changed much, still sharp, still steady. She gave me a long hug without asking questions. "You don't belong in a place like this, Ellen," she said, her voice warm but firm. "Let's go figure out how to get your land back." That first night at her home in Boulder felt surreal. She gave me her guest room and a soft blanket that smelled faintly of lavender. She even left out a mug of chamomile tea beside the bed. And for a while, I just sat there, the contract spread out across my lap, trying to breathe. By morning, Diane was already at her kitchen table, hair tied up, coffee steaming beside her laptop. The contract lay in front of her, annotated and marked. She looked up and gave me a small nod. "You were right to call me. This clause isn't vague. Ellen, it's very specific. Westridge Properties promised to develop affordable, sustainable housing on your farm's land within 10 years. And according to this, they didn't. That means we have a legitimate claim." I blinked slowly. Even if they sold it to someone else. Diane leaned back, eyes narrowing. "That's the part that gets messy. But here's the good news. If they transferred that land without disclosing this clause to the new buyer, or worse, if they did it knowing they wouldn't develop as promised, we might be looking at fraud." My heart thumped. "So, what do we do?" She tapped her keyboard. "First, we file for an emergency injunction to halt any development on the land until this can be sorted out. Second, we demand records, deed transfers, building permits, company ownership structures. And third, we find out who really owns that land now." She paused and looked up at me. Any idea who the current developer might be? I shook my head. No. But last summer, I overheard Adam and Vanessa talking about it. She called it a gold mine, said the clause was almost expired, and that condos were being planned, expensive ones. Diane typed a few things and clicked around her screen. "There," she muttered. "Found it. The property was sold by Westridge to a company called Arcadia Pinnacle Investments 4 years ago." I frowned. "Never heard of them." She turned the screen toward me. "Maybe not. But your son sure has." I leaned closer and stared at the document she'd pulled up. My breath caught. There he was. Adam Whitaker. Listed as one of the managing board members of Arcadia Pinnacle. I felt the blood rush from my face. "He's on the board," I whispered. "That means he knew. He's known for years." Diane nodded slowly. "He was part of the deal. He helped transfer the land. And if he did it knowing this clause existed, while intentionally keeping you in the dark, that's not just betrayal. That's a breach of fiduciary duty if he ever acted as your advisor. Maybe even fraud." My stomach twisted. All those holidays, all those quiet Sunday dinners, all the while, he was plotting behind my back, smiling across the table, pouring my tea, while dismantling everything I had ever given him. I felt sick. Diane reached across the table and took my hand. "You have more leverage than you think, and I don't think your son wants this dragged into court." Just then, my phone buzzed. I nearly dropped it when I saw the message. "Unknown number. I heard what you're doing. Be careful. There's more at stake than you know. Meet me tomorrow, 2 p.m., at Copperfield's Cafe. Come alone. I can help." My fingers trembled. Diane leaned over and read the message. "Who is that?" she asked. "Already suspicious." "I don't know," I said slowly. "But they know about the land." Diane didn't hesitate. "Then we don't go. Or if we do, I'm coming with you. It says to come alone." She crossed her arms, and I say, "That's not happening." I sat in silence, rereading the message. Something in my gut told me this wasn't random. Someone knew more than they were saying, and it scared me. Just as I was about to speak, another text came through, this one from Adam. Ellen, I've been thinking about everything. Maybe I made a mistake. Can we meet? Just talk, like old times. I stared at it. A wave of anger rose in my chest, followed by something worse, doubt. A quiet voice whispered, what if he really is sorry? What if this could be fixed? But then I remembered the smug look on Vanessa's face, the way Adam avoided my eyes in that driveway, the envelope in my hand. Do you think he knows we've started digging? I asked Diane. I think he's scared, she replied flatly. And I think the first message might be real. But either way, we don't walk into anything unprepared. I nodded, still staring at the messages. It was like standing on the edge of a cliff, two voices calling from below, one promising resolution, one whispering secrets. I want to go, I said, to Copperfields. Diane let out a long breath. Then I'll be nearby. We'll do this smart. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat up in bed, contract in my lap, the night pressing heavy outside Diane's windows. I kept thinking about that little boy I took in, the one who cried on my shoulder when he scraped his knee, the one who held my hand at his parents' funeral, the one who promised to take care of me one day, just like I took care of him. That boy was gone, and in his place stood a man who had orchestrated the theft of my life's work. But I wasn't going to disappear. Not now. Not when I was this close to the truth. Copperfield's Cafe sat on the corner of Main and Fifth Quaint, with red brick walls and wide front windows that let the morning light spill across tiny wooden tables. The kind of place that served real cinnamon rolls and coffee so strong it curled your eyelashes. I arrived early, too early. Diane had insisted on sitting at another table nearby, close enough to see me, far enough to not be obvious. She wore dark sunglasses and sipped her tea like any other patron, but her eyes never left the door. At exactly 2 p.m., the barista brought over a cup of black coffee I hadn't ordered. Courtesy of the gentleman in the corner, she said, nodding toward the back. I turned. There, tucked behind a newspaper, sat a man I hadn't seen in over 15 years. Richard Benton, the original founder of Ridgefield Properties, the man I had signed my farm over to. He stood slowly and made his way toward my table with the kind of limp you don't forget a reminder of a football injury he once claimed never bothered him, though we both knew better. Ellen, he said, sliding into the seat across from me, his voice low and careful. Richard, I whispered, stunned. You sent the message. He nodded. I heard about the injunction. Word travels fast in certain circles, and I figured it was only a matter of time before you came across that clause. I narrowed my eyes. You knew about it. I was the one who insisted it be included. He said quietly. It was my way of making sure the land didn't fall into the wrong hands. I had plans, real ones, for that property. Affordable homes, green space, a community center. But after I stepped back from the company, everything changed. What happened, I asked, even though I already knew the answer. My son happened, he said bitterly. Nathan. He took over and tossed every principle I ever built that company on, sold off anything he could to the highest bidder, including your land. I didn't know until it was already done. I leaned forward. And Adam. My son Richard sighed. Nathan brought him in. Said he was sharp, hungry. They were friends from business school. formed a private shell company, Arcadia Pinnacle funneled your land through it, buried the reversionary clause under paperwork and fake development plans. Then they sat on the property, waiting for values to rise. It's all about the money now. My throat went dry. They used my farm, my family's legacy, as a pawn. Richard reached into his coat pocket and slid over a small flash drive. Everything I've gathered is on there. Internal memos, board meeting recordings, emails. Enough to prove what they did, and enough, maybe, to stop them. I stared at the drive like it was made of gold. But why now, I asked. Why help me? Because I built Ridgefield to serve people, not exploit them, he said simply. Because what they did to you was wrong, and because I lost everything, they ousted me from my own board, said I was too old, too soft. I've got nothing left but the truth. His hand trembled as he passed the drive across the table. I thought if I gave you the truth, maybe you could do what I no longer can fight. I wrapped my fingers around the flash drive. Thank you, I said, my voice cracking. Richard stood, pain in his movements, but purpose in his eyes. Take them down, Ellen, he said, for both of us. After he left, Diane joined me. I showed her the flash drive. Her eyes widened. Let's go, she said immediately. We need to get this into evidence before they even smell what's coming. Back at her office, we plugged in the drive and opened the first folder. What we saw left us speechless. There were email chains dozens between Nathan, Adam, Vanessa, and their lawyers. They openly discussed the reversionary clause, how to suppress it, how to transfer the land without triggering it. They called it the loophole escape. One email even labeled me as a non-threat due to age and isolation. There was audio, too, crackly recordings of meetings where they joked about flipping the property for luxury condos once the old woman's out of the picture. And the worst, an internal video call where Adam laughed about using money from the farm sale to fund his MBA, knowing he'd later profit from reclaiming the same land. Diane clicked pause, her hand tight on the mouse. Ellen, she said slowly, this isn't just a land case anymore. This is conspiracy, fraud, elder exploitation. I blinked, numb. I thought I gave everything so he could have a future. He planned this, she said gently. From the beginning. My phone buzzed again. A new message from Adam. Ellen, where are you? I've been trying to reach you. Please, don't do anything rash. We can talk, just you and me, like old times. I showed it to Diane. Too late for sweet words. She muttered, he knows we're closing in, and he's desperate. I sat back, heart pounding. I remembered the last time I saw Adam as a child standing in the rain at the cemetery, clutching my hand so tight my fingers went numb. I raised that boy. I taught him to tell the truth, to take care of what's given, to protect people who can't protect themselves, and now. He was everything I warned him not to be. I looked at Diane. What do we do next? She gave me a fierce smile. We hit them with everything we've got. The courthouse was larger than I remembered. Cold marble floors, tall ceilings, the echo of footsteps too loud against my thoughts. It felt more like a temple than a place for justice, but justice was why I was here. Diane walked beside me, a file folder clutched under one arm, her lips pressed into a thin line of focus. We'd filed our emergency injunction first thing that morning, attaching the contract, the reversionary clause, and most critically everything from Richard's flash drive. The judge granted a hearing within the hour. That's when I saw them at the top of the steps, Adam and Vanessa. Behind them were 3 lawyers in suits, that probably cost more than I used to make in a year. And trailing behind, almost unnoticed, was Nathan Benton. I paused, frozen. Adam stepped forward, wearing a tie I'd bought him years ago for graduation. He'd kept the tie, but not the woman who gave it. "Ellen," he said gently, too gently, "you don't need to do this. We could have worked something out." I didn't respond, didn't blink. Detective Rivera, who had been assigned to our case after Diane shared the contents of the drive, stepped in then. She was small, sharp, and full of fire. "Mr. Whitaker," she said, her voice even, "you are under active investigation for fraud, breach of contract, and financial exploitation. I suggest you speak through your attorney." Adam's smile flickered. "This is all blown out of proportion. You broke into someone's home 2 nights ago," I said, finally finding my voice, "looking for that drive. Don't pretend this is some misunderstanding." He took a breath. "I was worried about you. You were worried about getting caught." One of his lawyers stepped in, whispered something to him, and they all retreated into the building. Vanessa shot me a glare that could have cracked glass. Inside the courtroom, Judge Harmon, an older woman with a no-nonsense look and a jaw that could carve stone, presided. She took her time reading through the case file. When she finally looked up, her eyes were sharp. "Ms. Whitaker, Ms. Lewis, please proceed." Diane stood, every inch the professional, and outlined our case with clarity and purpose, the original contract for my farm, the reversionary clause, the sale to Arcadia Pinnacle, and how it was orchestrated by individuals who knowingly concealed that clause to turn a profit. She laid out the emails, the video, and Adam's involvement. She even played a brief clip Adam on camera, laughing about using the old lady's farm money for his MBA and flipping the land later for 10 times the value. The room went still. Then it was their turn. Adam's lead attorney, a man with slicked back hair and the confidence of someone who'd never said, "I'm sorry." A day in his life stood and tried to paint me as confused, unstable, too old to remember what I signed. "Ms. Whitaker willingly sold her property," he said. "She received full compensation. This is, frankly, a matter of regret, not law." Diane stood again, her voice calm but cutting. "The clause is not ambiguous, Your Honor. Westridge was legally bound to develop affordable housing on that land within 10 years. They did not. They sold the property to a shell company, partially owned by Ms. Whitaker's adopted son, with the intent to build luxury condominiums instead. That is not regret. That is calculated fraud." Judge Harmon leaned forward. "The clause is clear. The issue is whether it follows the deed through multiple hands. That is precisely the point," Diane replied. "The transfer was made with knowledge of the clause. In fact, they conspired to suppress it." Then she clicked to the second clip, a conversation between Adam and Nathan, where they explicitly discuss burying the clause and transferring the title before Ellen catches on. That was the moment the tide turned. Judge Harmon didn't speak for nearly a minute after the video played. Then she turned back to the defense table. "In light of this evidence," she said, her voice even but firm, "I am issuing an immediate temporary injunction to prevent any further development on the property in question." Adam flinched. "Furthermore, I am freezing the financial assets of Arcadia Pinnacle pending full investigation, and I'm placing a protection order requiring Mr. Whitaker to remain at least 500 feet from Ms. Whitaker at all times." Relief washed over me, but it came with sadness too. I had never imagined it would come to this. standing in a courtroom, legally restraining the boy I once taught how to ride a bike. As we stepped out into the hallway, reporters were already gathered. Word had gotten out. Flashbulbs popped. Voices called out. I held Diane's arm, letting her shield me from the noise, and then I saw Richard Benton waiting on a bench by the exit. Thank you, he said quietly as we passed. You're doing what I couldn't. I nodded. We're not done yet. Vanessa was leaving the building alone. She moved quickly through the lot, clutching her bag, sunglasses hiding her eyes. I don't know what made me do it, but I followed her. Vanessa, I called. She stopped, turned, jaw tight. What do you want? Haven't you done enough? I took a breath. Did you ever see me as family, or was I just a burden? She gave a bitter laugh. You were a chain around Adam's neck, always reminding him of that farm, of what he owed. I winced, but I didn't look away. You stole from me, my land, my future, and now it's unraveling. She leaned closer, her voice a hiss. You don't know what you've started. Adam has connections. This isn't just about real estate anymore. People get hurt when they dig too deep. I held her gaze. I'm not afraid of the truth. Then you should be. She turned and walked away, but a chill stayed with me. Back at Diane's house, the evening was quiet, too quiet, and yet something inside me had changed. I had lost a son, but I had found my voice. And I was ready for whatever came next. That night, sleep didn't come. I lay in Diane's guest room. The window cracked just enough to let in the sound of crickets and the distant hush of passing cars. The air was cool, but my skin was clammy. I couldn't stop hearing Vanessa's voice in my head. This isn't just about real estate anymore. People get hurt when they dig too deep. I wanted to believe she was bluffing, trying to scare me off. But something in her eyes, something cold and unflinching, told me otherwise. Around 3:00, I was still wide awake when a loud crack shattered the silence. Glass. I sat straight up in bed. Seconds later, Diane appeared at my doorway, barefoot, her phone in hand. Someone's in the house, she whispered, eyes wide but steady. I've already called 911. Come on quick. She led me into the bathroom and quietly locked the door behind us. We crouched in the shower stall, barely breathing, listening. Footsteps creaked through the house, not hurried, calm, deliberate. Drawers opened, cabinets, a lamp fell with a soft thud. They're looking for the flash drive, Diane murmured, so close I felt her breath. Then the footsteps paused just outside the bathroom door. The handle turned. Ellen, a voice called through the door. I know you're in there. This has gotten out of hand. Let's talk. It was Adam. My blood ran cold. He jiggled the handle again. You don't understand what you've stumbled into. This is bigger than you know. People will get hurt if you pursue this people you care about. In the distance, sirens wailed. Adam cursed. This isn't over, he hissed. You raised me to be smarter than this. Remember, you taught me never to give up on what's mine. We stayed frozen as the footsteps retreated, followed by the squeal of tires and the fading hum of an engine. Police lights splashed across the walls minutes later. I opened the door slowly, knees trembling. The officer found a shattered window in Diane's kitchen, muddy footprints across her floor, and a tossed-over stack of legal papers. They took our statements, dusted for prints, and said what we already knew: the break-in wasn't random. The next morning, Detective Rivera met us at the station. She slid a pamphlet across the table. Witness Protection Program. At least until the trial, she said, her eyes full of concern. Last night wasn't a warning. It was a threat. I stared at the pamphlet. I hadn't done anything wrong. I wasn't going to run. I'm not hiding, I said quietly, pushing it back. Detective Rivera looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. Then you need to prepare yourself. These people don't play fair. Your son has made himself very dangerous. The words stung, but they didn't surprise me. Back at Diane's house, I found her pacing the kitchen. There's more, she said. I have a contact at the FBI. After last night, I asked her to look deeper into Arcadia Pinnacle. She just called back. Ellen. I braced myself. It's worse than we thought. That company Arcadia, it's a front. There's been talk for years about certain real estate groups being used to launder money for international organizations. Drug money, offshore funds. Arcadia is on their radar. My breath caught. You're saying, Adam's involved in all that. Diane looked pained. We don't know how deep it goes yet, but yes, it's very possible. I felt dizzy. It was one thing to know your child betrayed you financially. It was another to realize he might be entangled in something criminal, something violent. Before I could respond, my phone rang. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. Hello. A quiet voice came through the line. Mrs. Whitaker. This is Sarah Benton, Nathan's wife. I stilled. Yes, we haven't met, but I need to speak with you. It's about Adam and Nathan and the money. I stepped outside onto the porch, my heart pounding. I'm listening. Not here, she said quickly. Not over the phone. It's not safe. But I have evidence, financial records, internal memos, even recorded conversations, things that prove they've been laundering money through Arcadia. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear. Why are you coming to me? Because I have a daughter, she whispered, and I'm dying. Stage 4. They don't know yet, but I want to leave something good behind. I want my daughter to know I did the right thing, even if it's the last thing I do. Her voice cracked, but she continued. They're dangerous. You need to understand that. This goes deeper than anyone realizes. I swallowed hard. When and where tomorrow? 7 Willow Creek Bridge. I'll bring everything. But come alone. If they see me talking to you, they'll know, and they'll come after me or worse. My daughter. The line went dead. I stood there on the porch, frozen. Diane came out a minute later, her face drawn. What is it? I told her everything. By the end, her face was pale. We have to go to the FBI, she said. Tonight. I promised her. I whispered. She's terrified, and rightly so. But this is getting too dangerous. You can't go alone. I won't, I said, though I wasn't sure it was true. That night, I wrote a letter and sealed it in an envelope, leaving it on Diane's nightstand. I didn't know what was waiting at that bridge, but I knew one thing: I was going, because someone had to shine a light into the dark, and it might as well be me. Dawn broke slowly over Willow Creek Bridge, casting a soft pink haze across the water and the fog rising from the trees. I sat behind the wheel of Diane's borrowed sedan, parked just off the dirt road, watching the digital clock tick to 6:59 a.m. I hadn't told Diane where I was going, not exactly, but I left her a sealed letter on the kitchen table with instructions to open it if I didn't return by noon. Inside was everything Sarah Benton had told me, along with our meeting location. What Sarah didn't know was that I had a recorder in my coat pocket, already rolling. If anything happened, someone would know. At exactly 7:00 a.m., a black SUV pulled up on the opposite end of the bridge. A woman stepped out, clutching a large leather portfolio. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe mid-30s. Her face was pale, her eyes darting in every direction. Sarah. I opened my door and stepped onto the bridge, the boards creaking beneath my boots as I approached. She met me in the middle. "Did anyone follow you?" she asked, her voice low and tight. "No," I said. "But you look like you're being hunted." She gave a humorless smile. "I am." Then she held out the portfolio. "Everything's in here: bank records, property transfers, offshore account numbers, recordings. Adam and Nathan, they've been laundering money for the Delgado organization for 3 years. Real estate's the perfect front-inflated values, fake investors, cash deals. Your farm was just the beginning." I opened the folder and scanned the top few documents. Even without knowing all the terms, I understood enough. Shell companies, money trails, fake development contracts. One offshore transfer was dated just 2 weeks ago, signed by Adam himself. My throat tightened. "Why are you giving this to me?" Sarah blinked fast. "Because I'm dying. Cancer. They don't know. I've got 6 months, maybe less. I don't want this to be the legacy my daughter grows up with me turning a blind eye. I want to know that I helped stop it." She wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her jacket. "I'm doing this for her." Just as I opened my mouth to speak, a twig snapped in the woods behind us. Sarah's head whipped around. "Someone's here," she whispered. Another crack, a flash of movement in the trees. "We need to go," she hissed, turning to run. "Wait," I said, grabbing her arm. "Come with me. We'll go to the FBI together. We can protect your daughter." She shook her head violently. "No, they'll find her. She's in Canada with my sister. It's the only reason I dared to meet you." She clutched my coat. "Promise me you'll make them pay. All of them." Before I could answer, a shot rang out. Sarah gasped. A dark red bloom spread across her blouse as she collapsed into my arms. "No, no, no," I whispered, lowering us both to the bridge. "Run." She choked, blood bubbling at her lips. "Take it and run." Another shot splintered the wood just inches from my shoulder. I didn't look back. Clutching the portfolio, I half ran, half crawled to the sedan. Bullets chipped the guardrails behind me. I threw myself into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and hit the gas. The tires skidded on gravel before catching. In my rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of a figure in black stepping out of the trees, a rifle slung across his chest. But I was already flying down the road. Sarah's blood soaked through my sleeves, and I could still hear her final breath in my ears. I didn't go back to Diane's. I drove straight to the FBI field office in Denver, running red lights and praying I wasn't being followed. At the security desk, I stumbled in, shaking and breathless, holding that bloody folder like a lifeline. "I need to speak to someone in financial crimes," I said, barely coherent. "Now." Within minutes, I was taken to a secure room. I told my story again and again, each time to a more senior agent. When I finally found myself sitting across from Special Agent Kate Mell, head of the Financial Crimes Division, I was trembling but steady. "You witnessed a murder this morning," she said softly. I nodded. "I did. And you have evidence of a money laundering ring tied to Arcadia Pinnacle." I pushed the portfolio across the table, then slid the recorder out of my coat pocket. "Everything is here." The room went still as she opened the folder. "You understand," she said slowly. "We're going to need to place you in protective custody, effective immediately." I looked down at my hands still stained with Sarah's blood. "I'm not hiding," I said. "Not anymore." By that evening, raids were underway. FBI agents swarmed Arcadia's offices and the homes of Adam Whitaker, Nathan Benton, and several others mentioned in Sarah's files. Diane was brought to the office too for her protection and to corroborate what we had uncovered. "I thought you were dead," she said, hugging me so tightly I winced. "I would have killed you myself if you'd gotten shot." By nightfall, it was official: Adam, Vanessa, Nathan, and over a dozen others were in custody. Charges: money laundering, fraud, conspiracy, and homicide. And the investigation was only beginning. 3 days later, as I sat in a safe house under federal protection, the story broke nationwide. Grandmother uncovers massive real estate laundering ring linked to cartel. They called me a whistleblower, a survivor, a hero, but all I could think about was Sarah and the little girl waiting for a mother who would never come home. It had been 2 months since that morning on Willow Creek Bridge. 2 months since Sarah Benton died in my arms. 2 months since I walked into the FBI with her blood on my coat and a portfolio that cracked open one of the largest real estate laundering rings in Colorado's history. Now, I was sitting in a federal courtroom watching my son plead guilty to every count. Adam stood there, jaw tight, shoulders squared in his tailored suit, but his eyes were sunken, dull, like someone who finally realized the life he built was made of glass. The plea deal he tried to negotiate didn't hold. The evidence Sarah left behind, combined with Richard Benton's testimony and the recordings Diane and I secured, painted a picture that couldn't be ignored. Adam hadn't just been involved, he was one of the architects. The judge read out the charges like a slow, steady drumbeat: conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering, wire fraud, elder financial abuse, and obstruction of justice. When she announced his sentence, 40 years without parole, I didn't flinch. Adam turned toward me one last time, searching for something in my face. Maybe mercy, maybe regret. But I had none left to give. Vanessa was sentenced to 15 years for her role in suppressing the land clause and intimidating witnesses. Nathan Benton got 30. The man who pulled the trigger on Sarah life without parole. Justice. Yes, but it didn't feel like triumph. After the sentencing, I walked outside into the afternoon sun and took a long breath. The air smelled of concrete and car exhaust, but I could taste freedom in it. Not just freedom from fear, but from silence. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel erased. I felt real. Later that week, Agent Kate Mell called me back into her office. Her tone was different, warmer, lighter. "We finished processing the civil portion of your claim," she said. "The judge upheld the reversionary clause. Your farm is legally yours again." I blinked. "Mine." She smiled. "Yes, fully restored. And in recognition of your cooperation, the Bureau expedited the paperwork. You should be receiving the official deed this week." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. My hands trembled as I held the packet she handed me. Inside was a title, a map, and something I hadn't seen in years, my family's name printed on a deed of land. I drove out to the property alone that Sunday. The earth smelled like memory. The barn was gone, the soil scarred where early construction had begun, but the trees still stood. The wind still moved the same way across the fields. I walked out into the middle of the open stretch, right where the garden used to be, and let the silence wash over me. This was where my life had started, and now it was where I'd begin again. Back in Boulder, I sat down with Diane and Richard Benton and told them what I wanted to do. "I'm not rebuilding the past," I said. "I'm building what that contract always promised, a future." And so, we started the Sarah Benton Foundation. With the funds recouped from Arcadia Pinnacle's asset seizure and grants Diane helped me apply for, I began developing the land into what it was always meant to be: affordable, sustainable homes for families in need. The first cottage we completed was given to Sarah's daughter, Emma. She lives there now with her aunt, safe and surrounded by neighbors who know her story and honor her mother's courage. There's a community garden just outside her window where butterflies gather in the spring, and in the evenings, children play tag beneath solar-powered lights. I live on the edge of the property in a small cottage of my own. It's modest, 1 bedroom, a little porch, and a view of the whole valley. But I wouldn't trade it for any mansion in Denver. Richard visits often. He brings books and baked goods from the local co-op. We sit on the porch swing some nights, talking about everything and nothing. Sometimes we talk about our sons. Most times we don't. There's a comfort in silence when you've both known what it means to be betrayed. Over time, that quiet friendship grew into something neither of us expected, but both of us welcomed. A kind of second-chance companionship that doesn't need labels or promises, just presence. One evening, as fireflies blinked through the garden and the air turned soft with dusk, Richard reached for my hand. "Our children betrayed us," he said gently. "They chose greed over love, power over family. By all rights, we should be bitter. Sometimes I still am," I admitted. He nodded. "But you didn't let it define you. You turned all that pain into something beautiful." I looked out at the rows of new homes, each one filled with laughter, with meals being cooked, with hope being restored. "You know what the real irony is," I said, "in trying to steal my land. Adam gave it back to me." Richard chuckled, then fell quiet. "A real mother isn't just someone who gives birth," he said after a moment. "It's someone who sacrifices, who builds, who loves without asking for anything in return. By that measure, you're the most real mother I've ever known. The tears that came then weren't of grief, but of release. I had loved a child who betrayed me, and I'd found my way back, to my land, to purpose, to peace, and, against all odds, to love." It's funny how a single clause buried in an old contract can lead you back to yourself. I think about that a lot now, sitting on the porch of my cottage at the edge of the land I nearly lost. This place, once just soil and sacrifice, is now filled with voices again. Not mine alone, but children's laughter, neighbors greeting each other, families building something of their own. The dream that was promised affordable, sustainable housing wasn't just fulfilled, it was reborn. I named the community the Meadowlight Project, and the foundation behind it still bears Sarah's name. Her daughter, Emma, is growing up in a warm home not far from mine. I see her often bright-eyed, curious, always running toward the garden with her shoes in her hands and her hair wild in the wind, just like a child should be. Sometimes, when I'm feeling brave, I tell her stories about her mother, not the dark, final moments, but the courage it took for Sarah to do what she did. I want Emma to remember that her mother gave everything to make this place possible. Her legacy lives in every nail driven and every daisy blooming along the walking paths. As for me, I live quietly. I don't own much anymore. I don't need to. My home has a simple kitchen, a handmade quilt on the bed, and shelves full of books that smell like time. There's a bird feeder outside the window that stays busy from dawn to dusk, and a rocking chair on the porch that never seems to stop swaying. But most important of all, there's peace here, real peace, the kind that comes not from forgetting the past, but from making peace with it. I see Richard Benton often. He's become more than a friend over the months. He helps manage the foundation's development goals and sometimes brings over fresh bread from the market. We sit side by side, two people who lost everything but found a kind of quiet joy in what we rebuilt, not just with brick and timber, but with trust. "You ever think you'd get here?" he asked one evening, as we watched the sun dip behind the ridge, turning the whole valley gold. "No," I answered, rocking gently. "Not after what happened. Not after Adam." He nodded, as if he knew the weight of that name still lingered in the corners of my heart. "I think about him," I admitted, not with anger anymore. Not exactly, but with sorrow. "I raised him to be better than what he became." "You did," Richard said, "but he chose his own road." I glanced at him. "Do you think it ever mattered?" The love we gave Richard was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke. "It mattered to you. That's enough." Those words stayed with me, because truthfully, the ache never leaves entirely. Every now and then, I catch myself wondering what Adam is doing inside those prison walls. If he's thinking of the orchard where he learned to climb trees. If he remembers the scent of my biscuits fresh from the oven. If he regrets anything at all. But I've stopped waiting for an apology. Instead, I've learned to give myself the closure he never could. And I've discovered something else, too, something I never expected. People began to reach out. Letters from women I'd never met. Emails from men who saw themselves in my story. Grandparents, single parents, people who'd sacrificed everything only to be forgotten. They said I gave them hope. They said I reminded them that it's never too late to reclaim your voice. And in that, I found something even deeper than justice. I found purpose. So I started writing back. Each night, after the last porch light flickers out across the community, I pour myself a cup of tea and sit at my little desk. I write by hand real letters, full of encouragement and truth and the kind of strength I didn't know I had a year ago. I tell people, yes, it hurts, but no, you are not done yet. You are never done until you choose to be. One of those letters turned into a speech I gave at a local women's shelter. That speech led to an invitation to speak at a senior advocacy conference in Chicago. Me, just an old farm woman with a cracked voice and a steady heart, standing before hundreds, telling them not to give up. I never imagined this path, but I'm walking it now. And as I look out at the Meadowlight Project, I realize I've created something that will outlive me, something good, something rooted. Every home here bears the name of a tree, aspen, willow, oak. And every family that moves in gets a small journal and a welcome basket filled with seeds, tea, and a handwritten note from me. It's my way of saying, you're not just moving into a house, you're joining something sacred. One afternoon, little Emma ran up to me, breathless from playing. "Miss Ellen," she said, "Mama would love it here." I knelt beside her, my hands still dirt-stained from planting marigolds. "She does love it here," I whispered, brushing her hair back. "She lives in every flower, every light, every safe place we've built." Emma smiled, and I swear for just a moment I felt Sarah's spirit in the breeze. I stood and looked out across the field, my heart full. I had come home, not to the past, not to what was lost, but to something stronger, to what I had created in the ashes of betrayal, to what love had made possible again. The first letter from Adam arrived on a Thursday. It was thin, just one page, postmarked from the correctional facility outside Cannon City. I stared at it for nearly an hour before opening it. My hands didn't shake. I thought they might, but they didn't. Instead, There was just a kind of quiet resignation, like opening the final chapter of a story you'd already guessed the ending to. It began simply, "Dear Ellen, I don't know how to begin this. I'm not even sure you'll read it, but I need to say what I should have said a long time ago. I read every word. He apologized for how he treated me, for choosing greed over love, for letting Vanessa dictate the narrative, for pretending I was just a stepping stone. He didn't try to excuse it. And for that, I was grateful. But what struck me most was what he didn't say. He never asked for forgiveness. Maybe he knew better. Instead, he wrote about prison, how quiet it could be, how, at night. The silence made him remember things: my biscuits, the smell of hay in the early morning, the feel of my hand on his back after a bad dream. I remember you humming in the kitchen, he wrote. I used to think it was a song. Now I know it was the sound of someone trying to hold the world together. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into the drawer of my writing desk. I didn't write back, not because I hated him, but because I didn't owe him anything anymore. Not my words, not my time, not my peace. Still, I kept the letter, not as a keepsake, but as a reminder of how close I came to forgetting who I was, of how dangerous it is to silence yourself for the sake of someone else's comfort. I've been speaking at more events lately, senior centers, support groups, even a podcast recorded at the local library. They want to hear my story. And I tell it, every time, with as much honesty as I can manage. Not because it's easy, but because someone out there always nods along, eyes shining with recognition. They know what it's like to be pushed aside. They know what it means to be forgotten by the very people they gave everything to. And when they come up to me afterward, they don't say much. They just squeeze my hand and whisper things like I thought I was the only one. Or thank you for not disappearing. I've learned something unexpected through all this. I used to think strength meant standing tall through the worst of it, bearing the weight, being the quiet, steady anchor. But now I know real strength is choosing to speak, to walk away, to say enough. One day, I stood in front of a room full of women at a community center just outside Cheyenne. Most were older, like me. Some had grown children, some had none. All had stories, all had scars. I told them mine, not just about the land, or the betrayal, or the trial, but about the moment I stopped asking why me and started asking what now. And at the end, I said this: if they leave you behind, let them. But don't you ever leave yourself behind. Don't pack up your dignity and hand it over just to keep peace. Peace built on silence isn't peace, it's imprisonment. And you, my dear, were meant to be free. That day, I sold out of the little hand-bound journals I'd brought with me, blank pages waiting to hold someone else's voice. I called them Second Wind Diaries, because that's what we all deserve: a second wind, a chance to write our own ending. That night, back in my cottage, I sat on my porch and watched the lights come on across the Meadowlight Project. One by one, they glowed like stars fallen to earth. In those lights, I saw everything I'd rebuilt, not just structures, but lives, my own included. Diane had left earlier that evening, after we finished planning the next community event, a fall harvest celebration. Richard would be leading the hay ride, and I'd promised to make sweet potato pies. Emma would help decorate. It would be simple, joyful, real. I thought of Adam again, not with longing, but with a gentle ache. He made his choices, and so did I. But I didn't choose bitterness. I chose legacy. I chose a future stitched together from every shattered piece I refused to let stay broken. There's a plaque now in the middle of the garden near the community house. It reads, "This land was nearly lost, but it found its way home just like we all can." Sometimes I sit there in the morning, sipping coffee, watching dew gather on the petals, thinking of every woman, every man who's been told they're no longer needed. If I could, I'd say to them, "You are not a burden. You are not forgotten. You are not done. You still have chapters left." And I, for one, can't wait to read them. I never thought I'd find love again, especially not after everything. But there I was, sitting on the porch one quiet evening, Richard's hand resting gently over mine, the sky painted with the kind of pink that only comes after a hard rain. We weren't young anymore. We had both lost more than we ever imagined: sons, companies, homes, but somehow we found something new in the wreckage each other. It wasn't about romance or grand gestures. It was about understanding, about two people who had been betrayed by the ones they loved most, choosing to believe that not all love ends in loss. Together, we found peace in small routines: coffee in the morning, a shared laugh in the garden, quiet walks as the sun dipped behind the trees. What began in pain slowly turned into something tender, real, and enduring. And in those moments, I realized something simple but powerful. Sometimes, the greatest healing comes not from the ones who broke you, but from those who arrive when you're ready to rebuild. Love doesn't always roar back into your life. It can arrive quietly, hand in hand with peace, and even after betrayal, after heartbreak, you still deserve joy. If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever found strength after loss? Let us know. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this about resilience, hope, and second chances, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your next chapter might be just one story away.